Hello and welcome back. So, today you probably know we are looking at part one of Beowulf, the Anglo Saxon tale. So, getting on to part one of Beowulf, we won't waste any time because we did all of our background in the last video. What characteristics do you think make a hero? So, this is completely your own idea. What characteristics do you think a real hero needs to have? Well, there are a lot of qualities that make a hero, and perhaps some of the ones that you thought of is that they might follow a code, they might use their skills for the good of the less fortunate, but almost always they are selfless or a good person. So they're not really doing what they're doing for glory, they're doing it for just for the fact that it's good. Now, the Anglo-Saxons were a very different culture to us. They loved drinking. Or maybe that's not that different. But the thing they liked drinking the most was lots and lots of mead, which is a wine made of honey, which I think is starting to make a bit of a comeback. They loved finding, but they preferred stealing treasure. They liked fighting, and they really liked stories about heroes. Pretty much just male heroes though. I mean, they could have been talking about Boudica, she had existed before them, but there aren't many references made to her from around this time. Bit of a shame, really. Anyway, in Anglo-Saxon literature, which would have reflected Anglo-Saxon times, men would have been measured by aspects of masculinity that we might go on to describe today as perhaps toxic, arrogant, or maybe just plain risky. Men of that time were godless, they were fearless, they were fame-seeking, and most of all, courageous. That was the most important thing. They had to be warriors in everything they did. Even if they were fishermen, you needed to be a warrior fisherman. And so everyone who wanted to be a hero was meant to be in search of these things, and often they would achieve them through completing daring deeds, withstanding harsh conditions, or just beating the odds, which probably just meant getting lucky. And it wouldn't have been unusual for men in pursuit of becoming a hero to die to get their job done. So Anglo-Saxon heroes, and also quite likely Anglo-Saxon people, they learned to take whatever fate gave them without whinging about it. In fact, they made up all sorts of stories, like Beowulf, to kind of push the idea and push the message that if you take what fate gives you without complaining and with courage, and with absolutely no fear, then you would be recognised for that achievement. And so the Anglo-Saxon hero, unlike today's hero, they weren't necessarily right. They weren't necessarily just, and they weren't necessarily good, but they were the strongest and the most popular. So that was really what was important to them. So, for the Anglo-Saxon hero, their reputation and their legacy was what was important. They did not mind dying in pursuit of greatness. And since Beowulf is set in the North Scandinavia, they had the additional idea of Valhalla. So Valhalla is a great hall in Norse mythology where heroes go when they are slain in battle. And I suppose it's a kind of heaven type scenario, but it would be a great honour. But the problem with Valhalla is that it encourages a lot of risky behaviour, like getting into needless fights and sleeping with your sword, because the idea was that if you were slain in your sleep with your sword in your hand, that counts as dying in battle. But I'm not entirely sure what the rules were if you rolled onto the blade and, accidentally killed yourself in your sleep, and I suspect that probably happened quite a lot. So with no further ado, here is the overview of part one of Beowulf. So the poem begins with a prologue explaining the history of how the Danes, who were the ancient inhabitants of what is now modern-day Denmark and southern Scandinavia, came into power. and the influence that they exercised and how they became rich. It then begins to describe kind of Grendel, and Grendel is the monster in the story, so he's our villain, or at least he is for part one. It describes Grendel's attacks on the Danish hall of Heorot, which was a very fancy mead hall that King Hrothgar built for his soldiers to find peace and safety after a battle. We're told about this powerful demon now named Grendel, and Grendel is either jealous of the fun and feasting that goes on in the nearby hall, or he is just a neighbour with a sound complaint because he hates the noise he hears as he stalks the swamps and marshlands. So he's clearly, either jealous or got a real problem with sound pollution. And on his first attack, he kills 30 men. He kills 30 men, causing great destruction to Heorot and showing no mercy whatsoever. And these attacks, they continue for 12 winters, which means that they continue for 12 years. And there are constant assaults against Heorot, targeting anyone, young or old. Now, you'd think that people would stop going to the mead hall with these nightly attacks, but apparently not. Anyway, there are some biblical references made to describe how evil Grendel is and the danger he poses by telling us that he's descended from Cain. And Cain is the son of Adam and Eve, and he's the one who killed his own brother Abel. And after the murder of his brother Abel, he was cast out by God and fated to wander the world in exile. And he lives in a gloomy underwater lair somewhere beyond the dark moor, and we're told that he eats his victims' bones and all, and fights without weapons or armour. Now, 12 years later, in Geatland, a prince later named as Beowulf, he hears about the terror that Grendel has unleashed on Heorot for King Hrothgar, and he is described, Beowulf this is, not Grendel, as the mightiest man on earth. So what he decides to do is take a boat and 14 other warriors, and he sets sail for Heorot. And when Beowulf and his companions arrive, a scout sees them, meets them down at the shore, suspects that they might be here to start a war, but then is quite happy to hear that actually they've come to see King Hrothgar in order to try and get rid of the evil Grendel. So, Beowulf and his warriors are offering hope. And when they arrive at the hall, he reveals who he is. But we knew all along that this is going to be Beowulf, our title character. And King Hrothgar's advisors, they urge him to listen to Beowulf's offer. They talk about all of these amazing things that Beowulf's done. They talk about how God has guided him in order to combat the menace of Grendel. And there's a lot of talk about Beowulf's ancestry, because in Anglo Saxon tales, they love to talk about ancestry. And that is why the whole thing about how the Danes came about happens at the beginning of the story. But one of Hrothgar's men, Unferth, he challenges Beowulf because he doesn't think he's all that. And he makes fun of him for losing a swimming match with his friend. But Beowulf counters by responding that the reason he lost this race was because he was actually pulled underwater by 9 sea monsters who he slayed. And then, although he didn't win the race, he still finished the race. So that kind of is a way of indicating how strong Beowulf was, rather than being undermined by the idea that he lost something. Anyway, Beowulf tells the king how he's heard of Grendel, and he boasts that he's a magnificent warrior, which is maybe not quite like the hero that we'd expect in modern times. And he says, I'll be no match for Grendel. No, I will be a match for Grendel. Sorry. And since Grendel doesn't fight with weapons or shields, I am going to fight him hand to hand. And King Hrothgar probably thinks, well, that's a stupid idea. He's killed men every night for 12 years, but go on then, mate. And so Beowulf is then left alone in the mead hall with his warriors to go to sleep. Now, I don't know why you'd go to sleep when you're expecting an attack, but Beowulf strips off, gets rid of his clothing, his armour, and he puts away his weapons, so he's properly ready to go to sleep. And he puts away his armour because he is not going to fight how Grendel fights. And when Grendel eventually does emerge from the night and enter the hall while they sleep, he attacks and kills one of Beowulf's warriors, which he does whilst Beowulf watches on. So I don't know how really heroic that is. But what I do think is that that poor warrior is an example of a red shirt. So a red shirt, in the original series of Star Trek, whenever they went on a mission, they would take a character who you'd never met before who would wear a red shirt. And that character would inevitably always die. We would find out nothing about them. And essentially they are taken on the journey as fodder, because the main characters can't die, so they've taken someone else to do that for them. So this poor red shirt of Beowulf's was taken on this journey only for the purpose of being killed by the story villain Grendel. Anyway, after his poor man is dead, a fight occurs between Grendel and Beowulf. It's described in great detail, but the thing that's most important is that we know no harm could come to Grendel from weapons because he's a demon. However, Beowulf has this superhuman strength, and he essentially clings on to Grendel's arm and rips the entire arm off. And Grendel runs away to die. He jumps into his swamp, and his blood turns the swamp red. And Beowulf is victorious. So victorious that they take this arm of Grendel and they hang it on the wall of the mead hall. And people come from all over the land to see the arm, to praise Beowulf. And some even say they'd like him to become their king, although they do remain loyal to Hrothgar. And hearing their wishes, Hrothgar provides Beowulf with tons of treasure and then tells him that he will now become his son. Or at least he's going to treat him like his son. And then we kind of know that the people are getting what they want, so the king is responding to the people's wishes. So that is the end of Beowulf Part 1. This particular story would have been told by the bard in 3 parts over 3 nights, so that's how I intend to split it up. So this is the end of part 1. Thanks for watching, stay cute, be kind, and please subscribe.